The trouble is that a lot of movements in the global south experience these policies being dropped in their laps, and so, had their hands up saying, actually, we have better ideas, and we want to hold you to account, and we want to change the way this works. And the World Bank ignored them. And so they mobilized internationally. And this is how Via Campesina was formed. La Via Campesina, the peasant way, is now a group of over 200 million farmers, farm workers, and landless people from the global south. And they developed this idea of food sovereignty as a way of bringing back into the equation a conversation about power. Because food sovereignty is this idea that communities ought to have power over the way that their food system is run. And again, for those of you who've done the reading, I mean, to remind you that this is a systematically vague concept. There's a lot about, when you say communities need to be able to be in charge of the way their food and agriculture systems are run, what does that tell you about what the food policy is going to be? I mean, are we going to have local markets? Are we going to have, permaculture? Are we going to have, and we could have many of these things, but it's up to the community to decide. But before the community can decide, we need to make sure that everyone in the community can decide. And that's why one of the slogans around food sovereignty is that food sovereignty is about an end to all forms of violence against women. Food sovereignty is about an end to all forms of violence against women. And this violence is not just, it's not just the horrific domestic violence that women globally are subject to and survivors of, but it's also about the structural exploitation of not being able to take to sell your product in the market because the European Union or the United States is dumping theirs. The structural violence of not being able to send your daughter to school because she is required to work in the fields or to take care of the kids while you work in the fields. And these kinds of power relations need to change. If we're going to have a democratic conversation, we first need to make sure that there is equality so that we can have that democratic conversation. And this seems to me, this seems to me very interestingly kind of what's going on with the Occupy movement here. I was at the Occupy movement in New York on the first night, and I just didn't get it. Because there were a lot of people who were worried about the police coming and smashing them up, and they didn't know what they were doing. And I'm like, well, you don't know what you're doing. And on the first night of a food sovereignty event, that's what it would look like, right? I mean, it's all about making sure that you have the space so that then you can start deciding what the politics are. And Via Campesina spent 3 years getting this idea of food sovereignty together. And Occupy is being castigated for not knowing what they want just after 3 weeks. It's going to take a while. But that's okay, because actually what Via Campesina practices with the idea of food sovereignty is slow politics. This is not politics that gets done like this. It's politics that takes a very long time, and sometimes it can be very difficult and very awkward. I mean, there have been discussions, for example, I was just at Occupy Seattle, but I was there with First Nations people, with indigenous people, and they were saying, well, Seattle was already occupied. The Pioneer Square is this was Muckleshoot land. This land is already occupied, and in fact, what we need to be having is a conversation about moving beyond that. Similarly, in Occupy Wall Street, there was a line in one of the statements saying, we are all one people, we are all one race, we're the human race. And there are lots of people of color going, actually, you know what? That just saying that writes over a great deal of history and exploitation that we want to flag and we want to root out. And so there are these difficult conversations that can be had. And these difficult conversations are difficult. But what Occupy and what food sovereignty offers is a venue and a space and an openness to doing that. And so I guess what I want to do is end with a story about the food system from Malawi that I find incredibly inspirational. That again, I mean, it's about the challenging of power in remarkable ways. In Malawi, those of you who read the foreign policy article will know that there's this big drive towards a green revolution kind of approach to solving hunger in Malawi that involves lots of fertilizer application, a little bit of pesticide, and dealing with the monocultures of corn. And the trouble is that Malawi timed its agricultural buying of fertilizer incredibly badly. So they bought a lot of fertilizer in 2008, at the height of the fertilizer, when fertilizer prices were at the highest ever. And so Malawi, this country of the size of Pennsylvania with 15 million people in it in Africa, landlocked, dirt poor, emptied, it managed to just run out of dollars. I mean, it didn't help that the president at the same time also bought a jet. So there are lots of reasons why the dollar account was run down, but buying fertilizer was a big part of it. And so since then, we've seen protests because there's no money in Malawi now to buy petrol. There's no for gasoline. There's no money for fuel. And so in urban areas, people have been taking to the streets, and the government has been cracking down on those people. And 18 people died in protests earlier on this year as a result of these green revolution sort of technologies being adopted.